Today's mindful moment.
You know how people think you need years of study to understand big financial blowups? Like it's all charts and jargon.
Right.
Well, what if looking at regular folks in countries that went through some serious economic trouble
Yeah.
could actually tell us more about human nature than like any finance degree?
Interesting.
Let's dive into this book, Boomerang, by Michael Lewis. It's subtitled Travels in the New Third World.
Oh, I've heard of that one.
So we've got some excerpts, and what we're trying to do is pull out those surprising insights,
Okay.
into how different countries, different societies react when things go really, really bad financially.
I'm all ears.
Okay, so we're going to look at Iceland,
Mm-hmm.
that crazy boom and bust they had,
Yeah.
Greece and those deep-seated issues they've got going on,
Okay.
Germany, all those hidden things going on there, and then California's unique set of problems.
Buckle up.
Yeah, it's going to be a wild ride.
So what makes Boomerang so compelling, I think, is that Lewis bypasses the typical economic stuff
Right.
and focuses on human stories.
Mm-hmm.
He's giving us this comparative look at how national character, national traits,
Yeah,
really come to the surface under extreme financial pressure.
I like that.
It's almost like he's an anthropologist,
Right.
observing some, stressed ecosystem.
It's a perfect way to put it.
Yep.
Okay, first stop, Iceland.
Right.
So imagine this nation. It's so close-knit, so tightly connected
Yeah.
that their phone book, get this, lists everyone by their first name.
Oh, wow.
And practically everyone is born into the Lutheran Church unless they specifically opt out.
Interesting.
It's a picture of super intense social connections.
Yeah.
And that's key to understanding how their economy went from 0 to 100 and then back to 0 really fast.
From rags to riches to rags, right.
Exactly. So they went from being one of Europe's poorest countries to one of its richest basically overnight.
And that was largely driven by privatizing their fishing industry in the 70s.
It's like all this fish money suddenly flooded the country.
Right?
And then it wasn't enough. Everyone wanted to be an investment banker.
Oh, wow.
There's this amazing quote from one Icelander. Lewis asks him, "Then why did you think you could become a banker and speculate in financial markets without a day of training?"
Oh, yeah.
And the guy's response is gold. That's a very good question.
That is pretty funny.
It shows you this ambition, but it's almost innocent, driving this insane financial expansion.
It really highlights this crucial insight, right? That rapid growth,
Yeah.
especially without, the expertise to manage it,
Yeah.
can make things really, really fragile.
Like a house of cards.
Exactly. And, a British regulator who was looking at Icelandic banking at the time
Yeah.
said that everyone there was incredibly young,
Really?
all from the same little community in Reykjavik.
Oh, wow.
And they basically had no idea what they were doing.
So it was all based on inexperience.
Inexperience and insularity, yeah.
It's wild. And then even the way Iceland looked changed to reflect this new, get rich quick mentality.
So,
Lewis describes these half-built glass towers.
oh, yeah.
These monuments to this new money, new wealth.
Right.
He calls it asshole capitalist architecture.
Yeah.
And it's so jarring, right?
Yeah.
Because it clashes so much with this traditional Nordic architecture that's all about practicality.
Yeah.
It's a visual representation of how quickly and maybe unsustainably things were changing.
It's a classic boom scenario.
Right.
Where traditional checks and balances, the things that normally keep society in check,
Right.
get completely steamrolled by this
Yeah.
rapid accumulation of wealth.
It's like a gold rush, but with fish and finance.
Exactly. And remember when Kyle Bass, the hedge fund manager, tried to warn Bear Stearns about subprime mortgages?
Yeah.
They basically dismissed him, said,
Yeah.
You worry about your risk management, I'll worry about ours.
It was so casual, so overconfident, and this attitude seemed to be everywhere.
And then there's the problem that all these Icelandic banks were so intertwined.
Oh.
And that created this massive vulnerability.
Yeah.
Lewis uses this incredible analogy. It's like trading a dog for a cat.
Yeah.
And suddenly you have $1 billion in assets.
What? How does that work?
Because these banks were so close.
Yeah.
And they didn't have independent people checking the value of things.
Mm-hmm.
They could artificially inflate prices just by trading back and forth between each other,
Oh, I see.
creating this illusion of huge wealth.
So there's basically a bubble waiting to burst.
Totally. And then when warnings did come, like that report from Danske Bank
Yeah.
saying things were about to go south.
Mm-hmm.
The reaction in Iceland was so nationalistic,
Like how?
like anyone questioning their success was seen as attacking Iceland itself.
Ah, so they were in denial.
Completely. And
Yep.
then boom, the crash.
And what happened? The reactions were unbelievable. People were like terrified of foreign muggers coming to steal their savings,
Seriously.
which they had hidden in like board games.
Hidden in board games.
Yeah, it was this whole thing. And then all these Range Rovers started catching fire.
Wait, what? Range Rovers?
Yeah, it was bizarre. Tons of them just spontaneously combusting.
That sounds like a metaphor for something.
It totally does. It's this perfect picture of the anxiety and maybe even resentment bubbling under the surface.
Right.
And then you've got this guy, David Odson, who's running the central bank.
Okay.
He's a poet, actually, and a huge Milton Friedman fan.
Interesting combination.
Right. As everything's falling apart, he basically just retreats.
Huh.
And according to Lewis, he just starts writing poetry
Oh, wow.
while the financial world's imploding.
That's some serious detachment.
It is. And Lewis paints this picture of the central bank building, which is this imposing structure.
Yeah.
And right outside, there are kids sledding. Yeah, it's this powerful image of the disconnect between this huge disaster happening
Right.
and normal everyday life.
It's surreal.
It really is. So from Iceland's like almost dreamlike collapse, we go to Greece.
Okay.
And it's like the opposite of Iceland in a lot of ways.
How so?
Well, our sources describe it as the opposite of a collective.
Meaning, it's like
Every man for himself.
so individualistic.
Extremely. And what really defines Greece, at least in Boomerang, is this deep-rooted culture of corruption
Corruption.
everywhere. And I mean, the scale of it is just mind-blowing.
Like what? Give me an example.
Okay, so there's this Athenian construction company.
Yeah.
They paid zero taxes.
Zero.
Nada. On 7 apartment buildings
Wow.
and almost 1,000 condos.
That's incredible.
And it wasn't just them, it was everywhere. Lewis describes this whole system of fake receipts, bribery, you name it.
So corruption was built into the system.
Totally. It's like the state itself encouraged it.
Wow.
And all these scandals, one after another, they
Yeah.
just wore down the public to the point where they didn't even care anymore.
So apathy took over.
It's like they were numb to it. There was a complete lack of interest in things that should have been shocking.
Wow. That's really sad.
Yeah. And then there's this monastery, Varopaidi.
Okay.
Lewis calls it the soul of corruption in Greece,
The soul of corruption.
which is saying something. What's interesting is that everyone knew they were crooked,
Yeah.
but a lot of Greeks couldn't tell you exactly what they did.
Really?
Yeah. But there's this one guy, Father Arsenios, who ran the place.
Huh?
And people thought he was so good at like wheeling and dealing
Mm.
that if he was in charge of real estate, he could have turned Greece into Dubai before the crisis.
So the symbol of corruption was clear, even if the specifics weren't.
Exactly. And then you have the budget deficit debacle.
Oh, right.
So Greece first said it was 3% of their GDP.
Yeah.
Then they admitted it was actually 15%.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
That's like a 5-fold increase. And that lie basically triggered global panic and brought in the IMF.
It's hard to believe they thought they could get away with that.
I know, right? It shows this total lack of transparency and accountability.
Yeah.
And the German deputy finance minister at the time, he said straight up that Greece needed to like completely change its culture.
So it was a deeper problem than just the numbers.
Yeah. He said they needed to fix their tax system, change their whole approach to labor, you know, those 13th and 14th monthly salaries.
Right.
And even rethink the whole relationship between people and the government.
It's a pretty scathing indictment.
It is. Okay, now we shift gears to Germany.
Okay.
And it's a completely different vibe. The big theme here is history.
History. Okay.
Lewis describes Berlin as like this elaborate shrine
Oh, wow.
with memorials everywhere you look.
Yeah.
And it creates this feeling of like collective guilt.
Collective guilt.
Yeah. But it's also like when everyone is guilty, no one is.
That's a really interesting point.
And there's a story about a German official who wanted to take a picture of a Holocaust survivor's descendant holding the German flag.
What?
It's like this awkward, but also kind of sweet attempt at like reconciliation, right?
Yeah,
And it shows how much that history still weighs on them.
for sure.
And it comes out in this like weird almost hidden patriotism.
What do you mean?
Well, they're not super demonstrative, you know?
Yeah.
Like, they don't go crazy cheering for their team, and it's like taboo to say, I'm proud to be German.
Oh, interesting.
But then you get these jokes like about how Hitler built good roads.
Right.
It's this really complex relationship with national identity.
It's like they're trying to reconcile the past with the present.
Totally. And then you've got the IKB bank story.
IKB, yeah.
They invested a ton of money in subprime mortgages, which seems really clueless, right? But unlike those American traders we always hear about,
Yeah.
the German traders at IKB were making pretty low salaries.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it seems like they just didn't get it, rather than intentionally doing something wrong.
Right.
But the German public was so angry with them, like they were criminals.
That's interesting.
It shows this different cultural expectation of responsibility.
Yeah, a different way of looking at who's to blame when things go wrong.
Right. And then Lewis talks about these intercultural misunderstandings in finance.
Huh.
So these state-backed banks in Germany called Landesbanks,
Yeah.
they were really easily swayed by Wall Street guys, you know?
Like how?
Who would like wine and dine them, give them these lavish experiences.
Oh, the classic sales tactics.
And the Germans thought that meant they were like real partners.
Oh, they were naive.
Not exactly. It's more that they valued order and efficiency, so they thought everyone else did too.
I see.
And that's something that comes up a lot in the book.
Okay.
Lewis even tells this story about a gas station near the former East-West German border.
Okay.
And how the drivers there, they were so coordinated, so efficient. It was almost military.
So this focus on order is a real thing in Germany.
Big time. Lewis even analyzes like German words related to shit.
Really?
Yeah, he's trying to figure out if there's a connection to their national character.
Interesting approach.
It is. He admits it's not super scientific, but it's thought-provoking.
It is.
And then there's this guy, Wilhelm Nelling.
Okay.
He was like the biggest opponent of the euro.
The euro.
Yeah, he wrote these pamphlets called Goodbye to the Deutschmark and the Euro, A Journey to Hell.
Wow. Dramatic.
Right. He even sued to try to stop it.
Seriously.
And his theory is that Germans trusted the euro so easily because they didn't really care what it would cost if it went wrong.
That's a bold claim.
It is. He thinks they saw it as a way to, like, move on from the past.
To flush away the past.
Exactly. Like another kind of Holocaust memorial.
So their trust wasn't just naivety. It was a subconscious desire to, like, transcend their history.
Right. And that's so different from all the other countries we've talked about. It's like the Germans were these innocent bystanders in this super deceitful financial world.
And they just trusted the promises of no bailouts and balanced budgets.
Totally. Okay, last stop, the good old USA.
Right.
Specifically California.
California.
And it's a story of mania, dysfunction, and this like crazy lack of connection.
Okay.
So the psychiatrist, Peter Wybrow, he's got this theory about American mania.
American mania.
Yeah, he says our brains evolved for scarcity, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we're living in this age of extreme abundance.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's messing with us.
How so?
Well, we're driven by these ancient reward systems, this like lizard core of our brain that wants more, 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 even when we have enough.
And it's hard to override those impulses when we're surrounded by abundance.
Exactly. And that helps explain some of the crazy stuff that happens in the book.
Like what?
Well, take Vallejo, they went bankrupt, right?
Yeah.
And the fire department was hit really hard, massive cuts.
Right.
But then there's this guy, Chief Meyer, he comes in and he actually figures out a way to restructure things and make it work with way fewer resources.
That's impressive.
It is. But what he says is so interesting. He says that people get attached to what they take care of.
Mm-hmm.
And the union, they were fighting him every step of the way.
So even when the system is broken,
Yeah.
there's resistance to change.
Big time. And then you've got San Jose and their pension nightmare.
Oh, yeah, that was a big work.
Huge. They were spending more than half their budget just on retiree costs, pensions, and healthcare.
Wow.
And it led to what they call service-level insolvency,
Yeah.
meaning they couldn't even provide basic services.
What happened?
Libraries closed, community centers were empty, they laid off police and firefighters.
Oh, man.
It was bad. And the mayor at the time, Chuck Reed,
Yeah.
he talked about this mass delusion of endless prosperity.
Like people just believing that the good times would never end.
Exactly. And it's like, we're all going to be rich. We're all going to live forever.
It's a recipe for disaster.
Totally. And then there's this guy, Phil Batchelor, who came in to try and fix things in Vallejo.
Right.
He'd managed cities all over the country, seen a lot of tough situations.
Yeah.
But he said Vallejo was like nothing he'd ever seen before.
What was so different?
Just the dysfunction, the infighting. He actually made the city council promise to be civil to each other.
Oh, wow.
Just so he would take the job.
That says a lot.
It really does. And then, of course, there's Arnold Schwarzenegger.
The governor.
He kind of stumbled into the job.
Yeah.
But he had this strong belief in smaller government.
Right.
But he got so frustrated with the political gridlock, you know?
Oh, the people just refusing to compromise.
Exactly. He couldn't get anything done.
What was his take on it?
He talked about this vicious cycle of contempt for politicians in California and how state employee pensions just kept eating up more and more of the budget.
That's like the problems just kept getting worse.
But what's wild is that Arnold, he looks back on his time as governor really fondly. Yeah, almost like it was this fun adventure. He even says, you have to realize the thing was so much fun.
But he didn't really accomplish much, right?
No, not really. And he admits he wasn't that into the details of governing.
Meaning?
He said, I'm not into the local stuff.
Wow, that's a pretty detached way to be governor.
It is. And it kind of sums up a lot of what we see in Boomerang, you know, these big systemic problems.
Yeah.
But also these really personal human stories. Okay, so what have we learned? It's crazy how looking at these financial meltdowns, but through the lens of like, people reveal so much about who we are.
Right.
So in Iceland, that rapid change, it exposed their inexperience and like overconfidence.
Yeah.
Greece, it was all about the corruption and how resistant they were to changing things. Germany's whole reaction was shaped by their history and that focus on order.
And California showed us those unrealistic expectations and how much their politics were just like stuck.
Frozen in time.
It's fascinating how these like lights out moments really illuminate the character of these different societies.
And it makes you wonder, right?
What about us?
When the systems we rely on break down, what tendencies bubble up?
In our own lives and our communities.
Exactly. Do we see any echoes of these national experiences in our own, like, smaller scale challenges?
That's something to think about.
It is. So if this deep dive into Boomerang got you thinking, make sure to subscribe to the deep dive for more.
And share this with anyone who's interested in understanding what's going on in the world.
You can buy Boomerang using the link in the show notes if you want to go deeper.
And most importantly, keep thinking critically about all the forces shaping our world.
Because who knows what the future holds?